In this edition of the Red and Blue Political Roundup, President Trump appears to be taking a victory lap after the release of Attorney General William Barr's summary of the Mueller report. In his summary, Barr wrote, quote, "The investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference activities." The president took to Twitter following the report's release. He called it a total exoneration. And at the White House Monday, he said an investigation like Mueller's should never happen again.
But what they did, it was a false narrative. It was a terrible thing. We can never let this happen to another president again. I can tell you that. I say it very strongly. Very few people I know could have handled it. We can never, ever let this happen to another president again. Thank you all very much. I appreciate it.
Joining me now from Washington is Franco Ordoñez. He's a White House correspondent for McClatchy. Franco, thanks so much for being with us. So CBS News has learned the president and his legal team have not yet seen or been briefed on the contents of the Mueller report. When might that happen?
It could be soon. I mean, we don't know exactly sure either. I've been in contact with the White House every day since we knew that it was introduced. They have been on, similar situation as we have, kind of wading in. Not only Trump's team, but also, not only the White House, but also Trump's legal team, having some of the same similar questions. But I think it should be fairly soon.
Well, it's interesting. You have a new piece out that is looking at how the conclusion of Bob Mueller's investigation impacts the president's foreign policy. First of all, what has been the reaction to the end of this probe from diplomats around the world?
The diplomats that I have talked to around the world have been, a range from relief to surprise to a little bit of, shock. I mean, there were a lot of diplomats. I was just talking to someone today who told me that there was a lot of foreign leaders who expected that President Trump wouldn't make it to 2020. Here in the United States, we know that the likelihood that Mueller would have tried to indict the president was very unlikely. The DOJ said that wouldn't have happened, but not many in foreign countries that wasn't as clear. So there was still a lot of speculation that Trump could be face some type of criminal charge or criminal activity. So some are very surprised. Israel, though, is very relieved. Netanyahu got to come to the United States today, met with President Trump in that meeting where Trump talked about releasing or backing up some land in Syria for Israel, was very happy that he was able to be here and not have the cloud of the Mueller report over him. And other leaders are also now kind of bracing that, hey, they may have to deal with President Trump until 2020 when they may not have wanted to.
Well, is there a sense, Franco, in the White House itself that the conclusion of the Mueller investigation might embolden the president and allow him to push more forcefully on some of the other items on his agenda?
Absolutely. I mean, the feeling in the White House, our sources tell us, is kind of this "I told you so." It no doubt will lift, a lot of pressure on President Trump. This was one of the biggest distractions, he said himself, for trying to get his agenda items forward. We often would talk to Republican strategists who would tell us how desperately President Trump would need issues like China to get the China trade deal done or other issues. Now he does not need to be as desperate to get those agenda items pushed, those policies. He has a little bit more kind of leeway because this kind of political cloud is no longer over him, but that also means that he can do it more forcefully. He can push against adversaries like China, like Iran, like Venezuela. He will have more strength to kind of move forward on that he didn't necessarily have before, because there was still those kind of questions about whether he'd be distracted by all these, by the Mueller report and by the investigations that were expected afterward.
So the Mueller investigation may be over, but there's still this question about pardons. A number of Democrats have warned the president against issuing pardons following the end of the Mueller investigation. Do we know, Franco, are pardons on the table right now?
Well, certainly Democrats have, spoken out about pardons. Giuliani, Rudy Giuliani, the president's personal attorney, came out pretty quickly and said that they are not on the table, and this is not something that's being discussed right now. But certainly there is kind of that speculation out there. Giuliani, at least, was kind of using, saying that these are Democrats trying to kind of spin the cycle, turn what they see as a loss for Democrats into kind of more questions about what President Trump will do. But that kind of idea certainly is not going to go away anytime soon.
So there are also a number of other investigations involving Mr. Trump's business dealings, his inauguration, and campaign finances. Do we know how concerned the White House is about the effect that those may have?
They are concerned. I mean, certainly there's no question with the Mueller report, the conclusion not being collusion, that is a huge weight off of them, but it does not, totally take away the cloud of scrutiny. Congress is certainly going to continue to investigate wrongdoing, potential criminal activity. As you noted, there's other investigations around the country, particularly in the Southern District of New York. Barr himself noted that some of the things that Mueller was investigating were transferred to the Southern District of New York. In the Southern District of New York, they're looking at, some of Trump's past dealings, his Trump business. So there's very likelihood there's very much the possibility that more could come out. When I would talk to my sources in the White House before, last year before the Mueller report really got going, they would always tell me that their concerns were less about the Mueller report and less about potential Russian collusion and more about what the Southern District was coming up with, because those were issues that they had no control over because much of it happened before President Trump was in the White House.
Interesting. Well, Franco, as the president hits the campaign trail ahead of the 2020 election, how does the conclusion of the Mueller investigation play into his campaign rhetoric, you think?
Well, we're starting to already see it. The President Trump is going on the attack, blaming, and his allies and his supporters are going on the attack, blaming Democrats, calling for heads to roll, blaming the media, saying there should be firings, saying that people should be held responsible for what they see as a 2-year investigation that was a waste of time and waste of taxpayer money. Look, President Trump has a very good talent, as Corey Lewandowski and others have pointed out, of creating a foil, and this is the kind of weapon that he's going to try to use to kind of continue to dig. Democrats may want to move on in some ways, kind of focus more on their policies, but I think it's very likely that President Trump is going to continue to remind Democrats, remind the media, and remind his supporters that he has been, in his words, the victim of an investigation that was, untoward and unfair.
All right, Franco Ordoñez for us. Franco, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.